I am never walking down any dark alley alone at night. Call me paranoid, but good lord, I am never walking down any cold, dark alley alone, even if it was the shortest way home. What if someone steps out from the shadow and robs me? What if they assault me? What if they killed me? No, this is the kind of thing that only happens to other people. In fact, that may have been what 21-year-old University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee student Nathan Potter thought when he was attacked and killed while walking home to his apartment nearby. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Potter's killer, 18-year-old Shondell Jackson, had zero sorrow and no regret over his crimes, as shown by his disturbing lack of empathy or remorse during the trial in court. Jackson maintained this evil grin throughout court sessions, revealing himself to be a heartless, stone-cold killer. At one point, he was escorted out of the courtroom. Jackson taunted the victim's family by smiling. Yes, smiling. He smirked at the family of the man he had killed. If you found that gesture utterly distasteful, Judge Rebecca Dallett did too. That is why she sentenced Jackson to a much-deserved life term in prison, with no chance of parole.
I am going to go ahead on count 1, the first-degree intentional homicide conviction, and I am going to sentence Mr. Jackson to life imprisonment without possibility for extended supervision.
And as if he hadn't seen it coming, Jackson became enraged. He cursed out at the judge and grew violent to the point where court police had to move in and subdue him. And while Jackson's reaction was intense, members of his family had this to say to the victim's family after learning that the judge had imposed the maximum sentence.
When I saw it on the news, I even cried. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that mother is going through.
How much must the Potter family suffer at the hands of the Jackson family, you wonder? If you found Shondell Jackson's conduct in court to be distastefully cold, wait till you see how this 17-year-old convict appeared at his sentencing. Thomas T.J. Michael Lane. T.J. Lane fits the bill for a cold-blooded killer. On the morning of February 27, 2012, the 17-year-old walked into the cafeteria at Chardon High School and opened fire, killing 3 students and gravely wounding 3 others.
We get on the PA system? Yeah. Hi, Chardon High School, we had shots fired, gunshots, multiple gunshots. Multiple gunshots?
Yes. Lane was arrested and charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, and 1 count of assault following this horrifying incident.
I don't think anybody really ever expected it to be him, you know?
Never. Would you ever think that this, it's just one of your worst nightmares. You don't think this would ever happen.
In court, Lane showed no signs of remorse, despite the chilling nature of his crimes. He smiled and smirked and rolled his eyes, leading the prosecutor to label him an evil person.
Why? Why did you do it? Why?
Just when you thought Lane couldn't sink any lower, this is how serious he felt about the pain of the victims' families as they read their impact statements in court.
Well, it was a very difficult statement to hear and to see its effect on the families. I don't think anyone could say anything different.
And what he said when he called to address the court will leave you stunned. On the day of his sentencing, Lane sneaked a white t-shirt in court that had the word killer scrawled across the chest. The same disturbing word was written on the shirt he wore on the day of the shooting, highlighting just what a sadistic teen criminal he was. On March 19, 2013, Lane was eventually sentenced to 3 life sentences with no chance of parole.
Now, you understand that if a sentence of life without parole is imposed, you will remain in prison until your own death?
Yes.
Escaping the death penalty only because he was a juvenile at the time of the incident. Less than a year later, T.J. Lane made headlines yet again when he attempted a prison break, news that set off alarms in Chardon. But he was soon recaptured some 100 yards outside of the prison fence. But what a nightmare that would have been.
You will never, ever be in my thoughts after this. Never. My family will move on, not you.
While TJ Lane's crimes and conduct in court were crude and sickening, the next offenders are on a whole new level of depravity. More on that later. But first, the horror of these two teens did to their grandma rocked a peaceful city in Wisconsin and shocked the entire nation. Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape. On September 17, 2012, 78-year-old Barbara Olson was attacked and brutally murdered by her very own great-grandson, 13-year-old Antonio Barbeau, assisted by his best friend, 14-year-old Nathan Pape. Barbeau and Pape hacked and bludgeoned the helpless 78-year-old to death with a hatchet and hammer. A measly $100.50 was all they could steal from the elderly victim they had just brutally slaughtered.
We were going to try to scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
Okay. And when you say use force if needed, was there a discussion about what type of force you might use?
An attack, I guess to kill.
It was a murder that left the tiny community in Sheboygan County in disbelief and fear. But it's what the killers did after the murder that turned people's guts. Later that day, the two teen criminals went bowling and used their pitiful loot to buy themselves marijuana and some pizza. It wouldn't be until 2 days later that Barbara's body would be found and the two boys apprehended for her murder.
Please send an ambulance and the police. My mother is laying in the garage and there's a lot of blood and there's a blanket over her head. There's a lot of blood.
How did the blanket get over her?
I have no idea.
And how old is your mother?
She is 78.
Given the brutal and disturbing nature of their crime, prosecution determined to try both Barbeau and Pape as adults on first-degree intentional homicide charges.
I just want to say that I'm truly sorry for everything that happened. I truly regret every single thing that happened that day. Every single day that went by, I wish I could go back in time to stop everything from happening. That's it.
During the legal proceeding, the boys appeared genuinely remorseful for their mindless crime and freely volunteered the grim details of what was Antonio Barbeau's great-grand's horrifying last moments. On the day of sentencing, Barbeau cried, but despite this tearful gesture, both teens were sentenced to life terms in prison with parole eligibility in the year 2047 for Antonio Barbeau and 2042 for Nathan Pape. From the savage murder of a 78-year-old great-grandmother to the brutal and disturbing killing of a 45-year-old father, just how safe are you at home? Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero. On April 9, 2021, police were called to the 45-year-old Daniel Halseth's northwest Las Vegas home after his burnt and dismembered body, stabbed and cut 70 times, was found in his garage. Even more shocking was the revelation of who the murder was perpetrated by: Halseth's very own 16-year-old daughter, Sierra Halseth, together with 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero, who was her boyfriend at the time.
Where did the evil come that was bred into a soul that murders their own father?
The grisly details of Daniel Halseth's murder notwithstanding, it was perhaps this video showing the couple's lack of remorse that made this case most famous.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Day 3 after murdering somebody.
Whoa! Don't put that on the camera.
Where it was all smiles before their arrest and trial. In court, the gravity and utter brutality of the savage crime forced a mood and tone altogether. Sierra remained speechless, expressionless, and emotionless throughout the proceedings, revealing the purported chilling and disturbing relationship she had with her father. Sierra's family denied allegations claiming that Daniel physically and sexually abused his daughter, and several members of her family even suggested the death penalty for the murderous teens.
You have 555 days credit for time served. That is a total aggregate sentence of life in the Nevada Department of Corrections with the possibility of parole up to 22 years of good service. Mr. Guerrero, in accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, you're going to be adjudicated guilty on count 1, conspiracy to commit murder. You have 555 days credit for time served. That is a total aggregate sentence of life in the Nevada Department of Corrections with the possibility of parole up to 22 years.
The couple pleaded guilty to all charges against them, including murder with a deadly weapon, robbery with a deadly weapon, fraudulent use of a credit card or debit card, and arson. Both Sierra and Guerrero were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Up next, the disturbing case of a troubled 15-year-old girl charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action reveals how a troubled upbringing and childhood psychological issues reveal the complexities and devastating consequences of juvenile criminal behavior. Alyssa Bustamante. On the 21st of October 2009, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante lured her 9-year-old neighbor Elizabeth Olton into the woods before slitting her throat and stabbing her to death. Worse still, after attempts to burn the body failed, Bustamante went and buried Olton's lifeless body in a pre-dug grave, demonstrating premeditation of the senseless murder.
How did she kill her?
She died.
How did she die? 9-year-old girls don't just die.
We were messing around. And she fell back and hit her head.
Was her throat cut?
Yeah. Oh. I can't believe.
Grandma?
Oh my God.
Her grandma didn't have the stomach for this, and it was Bustamante herself who led police to the hole she had dug the week prior, being the grave where she buried her brutally slain victim. Bustamante was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action following the death of Elizabeth Olton. She first appeared in court on November 17, 2009, where she pleaded not guilty despite her confession.
Mr. King?
Ms. Bustamante will waive formal arraignment and enter pleas of not guilty.
All right.
Later, however, Bustamante pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder in exchange to avoid trial and possibly the life sentence without parole. Bustamante was a troubled girl with a troubled upbringing who acted out her dark desires upon her innocent 9-year-old neighbor, and she tried to show how much she regretted her actions when she made her statement during her sentencing hearing. The judge, however, was not moved by her remorse, handing her a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years, making her earliest possible release in 2054, when she will be 60 years old. And just when you thought you've seen it all, another kid criminal proves himself to be the epitome of evil. This kid was convicted on a charge of first-degree murder with premeditation and extreme atrocity. Matthew Borges. On November 2016, Matthew Borges had reportedly gone to smoke marijuana with his classmate, 16-year-old Lee Manuel Vilora Paulino. That was the last time Paulino would be seen alive. 2 weeks later, a dog walker stumbles upon a body along the banks of Merrimack River. That body belonged to Paulino, stabbed to death and decapitated. Borges was not initially the suspect, but when all the evidence and witness accounts started pointing irrefutably in his direction, the detectives looked no farther. Given the nature of the crime, the judge ruled that Borges would be tried as an adult on the charges of first-degree murder, which meant that Borges was looking at a life sentence without the possibility of parole if convicted. Borges, who was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, was, for the most part, unbothered and remained stoic and expressionless, even when his sentence was being handed down.
Matthew Borges, on indictment number 2017-115. The jury, having returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of murder in the first degree on the theories of deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty, you will hearken to the sentence the court has awarded against you. The court, having duly considered your offense, it is ordered by the court that you be punished by confinement for a term of life, with parole eligibility on the theory of extreme atrocity and cruelty at 30 years. and parole eligibility on the theory of deliberate premeditation at 30 years to run concurrent.
Eventually, Borges was sentenced to life imprisonment, but a parole clause had to be added because he was a juvenile at the time of the crime, despite having been tried as an adult. While 15-year-old Borges will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years in prison, crime history pages list the next juvenile offender as the youngest person in the United States to be sentenced to life in prison, without the chance of parole. He was 12 years old. Who is he? Where is he now? And what horrible crime did he commit? Let's go back to where it began. Lionel Alexander Tate. On the 28th of July, 1999, 12-year-old Lionel Tate was playing wrestling with his 6-year-old neighbor, Tiffany Unick, when, according to Tate, she stopped breathing. Unfortunately, Tiffany died before she could be seen by the doctors. Even more shocking were the disturbing details on her autopsy report. The poor girl had suffered a badly fractured skull, broken ribs, and more than 30 internal injuries, including a lacerated liver. When asked, Tate claimed that he was only imitating pro wrestling moves he had seen on TV when he accidentally injured the girl, adding that he did not intend to kill his friend. Following the tragic incident, Tate was charged with murder in the first degree and would be tried as an adult, which, according to Florida law, meant that he was facing life imprisonment with no chance of parole if convicted. Tate's emotional state during the trial suggested genuine remorse and sorrow for his reckless actions, leading to the death of his friend. Tate was in tears throughout his sentence hearing, where the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. He was only 14 years old at the time. That is not where this story ends. Tate's sentence sparked nationwide debate as to whether the sentence was too harsh. Many, including the lawyers who prosecuted him in court, pleaded for leniency on Tate's behalf. As luck would have it, Tate got his second chance after an appeal court threw out his conviction in 2003. Tate walked out of jail a free man, only to find himself in trouble with the law not long after. In May of 2005, Tate was positively identified as the gunman in an armed robbery case where a pizza man was beaten and robbed at gunpoint. In May of 2006, Tate pleaded guilty to gun possession, which also meant he violated his probation and was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. The judge said to him, "Lionel Tate, you have run out of second chances," before sending him to jail. Tate is expected to be released in January 2031, where he will be 42 years old. Hey, that was it for this one. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more content like this. See you on the next one.